Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Governor Ralph Northam to resign tonight on the heels of his controversial third trimester abortion comments that many said amounted to infanticide. But the resignation calls tonight are not about that. They're about this, an indefensible photo found in a medical school yearbook. Northam admitting tonight he is in the picture, showing one person in blackface, another in a Ku Klux Klan robe and hood. Let's go right to correspondent Leland Vittert for the very latest, and it changes minute by minute. Good evening.
It does, certainly, Shannon. You pointed out the calls for resignation are growing. Just in the past couple of minutes, Cory Booker, who announced today that he was running for president, just on Twitter now saying that Northam needed to resign, and the list grows by the minute. But Northam isn't resigning. He also isn't defending the photo that he appeared in costume in his medical school yearbook. Now, he admitted to being in this photo in his statement. Here's the picture. We do not know whether Northam is the one on the left appearing in blackface or the guy on the right dressed in a Ku Klux Klan hood and robes.
That photo and the racist and offensive attitudes it represents does not reflect that person I am today or the way that I have conducted myself as a soldier, a doctor, and a public servant. I am deeply sorry.
Not enough for Kamala Harris, senator from California and presidential candidate. Leaders are called to a higher standard, and the stain of racism should have no place in the halls of government, she wrote. The governor of Virginia should step aside so the public can heal and move forward. Here's another presidential candidate.
I do think, of course, that there's the opportunity to understand and accept his apology. But I also believe that that's separate and apart from him continuing in a position of trust and authority, which is the governor's office. So I hope that he does resign.
An extensive but not exhaustive list on those calling for the resignation: Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, the NAACP, Planned Parenthood, the Virginia Republican Party, Elizabeth Warren, and Kirsten Gillibrand. All right, here's the tweet from Kellyanne Conway. This should be easier work than parsing every word and semicolon in Kavanaugh's yearbook, alluding to Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing, where yearbooks were used to try and back up those unproven accusations. You might remember Northam's name because he spent this week in the spotlight starting Wednesday morning with this discussion on a radio program about a late-term abortion bill that at the time was in the Virginia state legislature.
If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue.
Well, and he certainly did not walk those comments back when accused of allowing or supporting infanticide. The current lieutenant governor of Virginia is an African American. He hasn't weighed in on the yearbook picture scandal yet, at least in the political world. There's a big question, Shannon, of how was this yearbook picture missed by well-funded opponents and their opposition research teams in not only the primary election, but the general election against Ed Gillespie as well. Race, a huge factor in that election, with people saying Ed Gillespie was a racist. That's why you had to vote for Ralph Northam.
Yeah, it is interesting. And there were many campaigns before that between medical school and now that Northam has run. So good question. Leland, thank you. All right, let's bring in Fox News contributors Doug Schoen and Jahmu Green, both longtime Democrats. Great to have both of you with us tonight. Jahmu, your immediate reaction to this?
He's gone. He needs to resign, full stop. There is no discussion that should be had about that. The thing is, Shannon, this has to be a much bigger conversation. And I want to talk about the Democratic Party's responsibility here for a second. I heard Howard Dean say one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard just a few minutes ago on another channel. He said that, well, you know, black people are going to decide the fate of Ralph Northam. The reality is racism is not something for black people to fix. And we have these conversations in these moments when there are these flare-ups, and they're usually Dems versus Republicans and pointing the finger at the one incident. There's a much bigger conversation that needs to happen. The Democratic Party has to deal with the racism within our own party. I said that very clear when I ran for DNC chair. But the thing is, anyone on any side, and I will say this to conservatives right now, who are cheerleading this and seeing this as something that's great, that this person is being brought down, that's also wrong. Yeah. So how do we move past the reality that racism is embedded in our culture? There are many of our viewers who think that racism died with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That is just not the case. But in 1984, when he was in that picture as a KKK, as a Klansman, or in blackface, I think I was 10 years old. I knew it was wrong. Any child would know it was wrong. He certainly knew it was wrong. It's time for him to go, but it's time for all of us to deal with this in a much more responsible way.
Yeah, I mean, it sparks very difficult conversations. He is apologizing, but tonight not saying that he's resigning, saying he intends to finish out his term, as you saw in Leland's piece there. I want to read something from the Washington Post, which talks about several scenarios about what could happen next. They say don't necessarily count him out. They say it's easy in the blistering aftermath of an emerging scandal to assume that it will inflict more political damage than one might expect. Politicians expected to walk away from their positions in the face of public opprobrium have not infrequently served out their terms and have even been reelected. There are good reasons to think Northam will similarly be able to ride out his term, including that he's constitutionally limited to only 4 years anyway. Doug, does he survive politically?
Well, I must tell you, I agree with virtually everything Jehmu said and couldn't disagree more with the Washington Post. I think the sign here of really extreme racism, insensitivity, goes beyond what any rational human being, Democrat, Republican, liberal, moderate, or conservative, should tolerate. His ability to serve and my party's ability to win the election is hurt inexorably by this outrageous collection of pictures. And that, plus his positions on infanticide, which to me is beyond disgusting, renders him unable to offer leadership. Virginia's a swing state, and I think for the reasons that Jehmu eloquently addressed, a good first step, an important first step, is for him to resign forthwith.
Well, we're getting word tonight again of more calls for resignation. I'm sitting here and the list is growing in my ear as producers are sharing with me more information about more and more people who are stepping forward who are very closely related to him, and some of them not as relatives but politically so, and those saying that they hate to say these things and to call for him to step down because they've known him to be, they say, a good man and a good legislator with respect to a number of things. So this is just the beginning of this conversation. Doug and Jehmu, thank you both for weighing in.
Thank you.
It starts from here.
Thank you, Shannon.
Okay. We've got a Fox News alert. President Trump may go where few presidents have gone before in a State of the Union address. He's warning he may pull the trigger on an emergency declaration to build a border barrier. Correspondent Ellison Barber is live in West Palm Beach near the Winter White House, the president's Mar-a-Lago estate. Good evening, Ellison.
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, a bipartisan conference committee is in the process of trying to negotiate a border security package that President Trump will sign by February 15th. President Trump and quite a few people have expressed skepticism at how those talks will actually turn out. President Trump telling the New York Times that at this point, those negotiations, those discussions are proving to be a waste of time. And he suggests that he's prepared and even expecting to have to declare a national emergency in order to get the funding that he wants for his proposed border wall. President Trump today hinting that perhaps that sort of action could be announced in his State of the Union address.
But are you saying now you expect to declare a national?
I don't want to say, but you'll hear the State of the Union and then you'll see what happens right after the State of the Union, okay? There's a good chance that we'll have to do that, but we will, at the same time, be building, regardless, we're building wall, and we're building a lot of wall, but I could do it a lot faster the other way.
A senior administration official who briefed reporters this afternoon on the president's plans for his State of the Union address declined to comment when asked if the president planned to make that sort of announcement during his address to Congress. The first family arrived here in Florida around 7 o'clock this evening. President Trump is expected to stay in Mar-a-Lago until Sunday. His annual address to the joint session of Congress is set to take place on Tuesday. And according to the senior administration official, the theme is choosing greatness. The official told reporters President Trump will focus on 5 key themes. He'll talk about immigration. He'll talk about trade, the trade relationship with China, and the deal to replace NAFTA. He'll broadly address rebuilding America. Mr. Trump is expected to ask Congress to come up with some sort of infrastructure package. He'll also talk about the need to lower the cost of health care and prescription drugs. And he'll address national security, updating Congress on U.S. military efforts around the world and his, at times, controversial desire to end military involvement in some of those places. The administration says the president will focus on unity and tell members of Congress, quote, together we can break decades of political stalemate. We can bridge old divisions, heal old wounds, build new coalitions, forge new solutions, and unlock the extraordinary promise of America's future. The decision is ours to make. Shannon.
All right, Ellison Barber at the Winter White House. Thank you so much. Great to see you. All right, we are just days away from Super Bowl Sunday. Thousands descending upon Atlanta, and Homeland Security is trying to clear up ahead of them getting there. 40 people arrested in a sex trafficking sting in Atlanta. The president's pointing to the southern border.
Unsecure borders give traffickers free and clear passage to transport their victims into the United States.
Stick around for trafficking experts Alma Tucker and Donna Rice Hughes. They met with the president today at the White House to talk about the shocking reality of what's happening at our border and beyond. And later, the remarkable story and journey of one Marine veteran accused of war crimes he did not commit. Stick around. And the New England Patriots. Homeland Security is already there, cracking down in advance. Correspondent Trace Gallagher is following a case of a sex trafficking roundup. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. Atlanta is already considered one of the nation's busiest hubs for sex trafficking, and the Super Bowl in town clearly exacerbates the problem. So for investigators, this week is an all-hands-on-deck situation to catch the traffickers before the big game when the criminals move on and the free-spending travelers go home. So far, 40 people in Atlanta have been arrested for trafficking, and more importantly, 4 missing people have been recovered. Here's DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Watch.
And some of the victims that we have saved, unfortunately, include underage children that have been brought in for the purposes of being sold and abused as part of Super Bowl activities.
Along with a law enforcement effort, a group called Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution, or SOAP, has been passing out flyers with the names and pictures of 16 missing girls, some missing for years. Airports and hotels are prime spots for trafficking. In fact, some airlines are now teaching their employees what signs to look for. And President Trump is using the sex trafficking problem to refocus attention on border security and the wall. Listen.
Unsecure borders give traffickers free and clear passage to transport their victims into the United States. It's a tremendously big moneymaker for some very, very bad people.
And to better illustrate the president's point and what's happening on the ground in Atlanta, we should note that earlier this month, a 4th defendant was sentenced in an Atlanta-based sex trafficking ring where young women from Mexico and Central America were being smuggled across the southern border to engage in prostitution. The FBI says the suspects lured the women to the U.S. with the promise of love, marriage, and jobs. Shannon.
It's much worse than people know. Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Let's bring in the president of International Network of Hearts, Alma Tucker, who runs safe houses to care for trafficked boys and girls, and the president of Enough is Enough, Donna Rice Hughes. Both of them met with the president today at the White House to talk about this issue. Thank you all for coming in. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having us.
I want to throw up something, some statistics. This is from ICE. In fiscal year 2018, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Homeland Security investigations made 1,588 human trafficking arrests. They identified 308 victims. Now, they say of these arrests, 1,543 were for sex trafficking violations. Alma, how bad is the problem?
Well, every day is growing It's growing. The problem is not getting any less. It's bigger and bigger. Why? Because, for example, the human trafficking is like in the level of selling drugs or selling guns, but you can sell them once. And one human, you can sell them 35 times a day. Then it's horrible. It's a lot of money involved.
Yeah, I want to play something from former DHS Special Agent Tim Ballard. I know he was with you all at the White House today. Here's what he had to say about one of the cases.
This little girl was kidnapped in Central America, 11 years old, groomed for 2 years, with the intent of getting her ready to come to America. Why? Because we are the highest consuming nation of child pornography. We are the clientele that's the big money.
Donna, that just... it's disgusting and heartbreaking at the same time.
Well, it really is, and this is happening within our borders. It's not just children coming in from other nations, but our children. So no child is really immune because there is a supply and demand issue. And like he said, we're one of the top consumers of child pornography in the world.
And producers, too.
And producers of child pornography. And we're number 2 as far as hosting child pornography websites in the U.S. We're also number 1 with respect to hardcore extreme pornography, which many of these people depicted in child or adult pornography are trafficked, so they're getting re-exploited. But the point is it's fueling the demand so that the people looking at this kind of content, they want to act out on a real person. And like Alma said, these children and women are abused 20, 30, 40 times a day. And if it was just one person, it would be enough for everybody to realize this is a nonpartisan issue. We need to check our differences at the door and have outrage on a bipartisan level and take action.
And there's been a lot of reaction as the president has talked about some of these cases. There are people saying he's politicizing it so he can get his border wall. But as you say, taking politics out of it, and Alma, you see this firsthand. I mean, what is happening to these young people? I know you try to give them a chance to rehabilitate and to have some education and move on with their lives, but I gotta imagine this is absolutely devastating.
It is. I had the opportunity to serve girls and boys and sometimes also adults. And usually it's someone that's vulnerable situation, maybe coming from a very poor situation or just looking for a better life. Who's not looking for a better life, for opportunities? I remember one case, and I was called to provide services. She was brought through the mountains from Tijuana, crossing the border to San Diego, and she was only 14-year-old. The mother paid to a smuggler to bring her without documents through the mountains, and the smugglers told her then her parents didn't pay the quota, then she has to pay with her own body. And for hours, for more than a day, they were raping one and another, the men that were in the same group, until the Border Patrol was able to rescue them. Then I was there in the hospital. I remember I found a little girl, 14-year-old, in tears, crying for her mother. And I was able to be there and hold her hands through all the trauma, after trauma. But it's always important to somebody then knows how to take care of cases for survivors, for victims, to watch for them.
Yeah, there's so much more that we don't know. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg. But thank you both for coming in and talking to the president about this today as well. All right, we've got a Fox News alert. The Virginia Legislative Black Caucus just finished meeting with the governor, Governor Northam. They say they believe it's clear he can no longer serve as Virginia's governor. They think it is time for him to resign. And now the Virginia Senate Democrats are calling for resignation as well. The governor tonight has said he's sticking around. We're going to have more on this story just ahead. Well, a caravan of Central American migrants picking up steam. They could reach our southern border just in time for the president's State of the Union address next week. We'll take you to Mexico after the break. And later, it is a tragic story of betrayal. Marine veterans of an elite special operations unit have been fighting for more than a decade to clear their reputations and their records. Tonight, vindication. Retired Major Fred Galvin is live with us to explain after the break. Expected to show up at the Texas border much faster than originally expected. Maybe even in time for the president's State of the Union address, where he is warning he may declare a national emergency to build the border wall. Correspondent William Lajeunesse is in Tijuana with more. William.
Well, Shannon, both Republicans and Democrats are using the situation in Mexico to score political points. Democrats, pointing to that big fentanyl bus at the Nogales port of entry, say that underscores their argument that new border security money should go to the ports of entry to battle drugs. President Trump, looking at the rising violence rate in Mexico, says that justifies his wall. A fence, much of it the bollard style, the steel slats that the president wants, well, that already stretches across every inch of California except for 26 miles of mountains. The president says putting every penny into the ports ignores the problem of human smuggling.
It's very hard to do human trafficking through ports of entry because you have people standing there looking and they say, hey, what's going on in the back seat?
The latest caravan of some 2,500 Central Americans left Mexico City Wednesday morning. Some will come to California, others to Texas. Some will cross illegally, others will claim asylum. Well, this week, the U.S. implemented a program to keep asylum seekers in Mexico. While migrant advocates say the program is illegal, inhumane, and dangerous, given the homicide rate in Tijuana, returning Central Americans that we talked to said they preferred working in Mexico than detention in the U.S.
I'm just going to go to work. I'm going to go to the church, and I'm going to work at a hotel.
If they did not want us to be back here, they would have sent us back to Honduras.
These migration protection protocols are not about protecting anyone. They're actually a plan to return people seeking asylum to Mexico in violation of U.S. asylum laws passed by our Congress.
So the U.S. says this program in Mexico is meant to end or reduce catch and release because of a lack of detention beds in the U.S. and, of course, court rulings. The U.S. also said today, Department of Homeland Security officials told us, they want to expand the program beyond San Ysidro and single males, which is currently limited to other cities along the border. But right now, Mexico has not agreed. Shannon?
All right, William Lajeunesse in Tijuana, thank you. And tonight we've got an extraordinary story of vindication. A Marine veteran of an elite commando force has spent the last 12 years fighting the Pentagon after being falsely accused of killing civilians during a 2007 ambush in Afghanistan. Now, his record will be wiped clean, and the Board of Correction of Naval Records says he should be considered for a retroactive promotion. Joining me now to share the story, retired Marine Corps Major Fred Galvin. Great to have you with us tonight, sir.
Thank you for having me, Shannon.
So I know that you were part of a convoy there in March of 2007 when a suicide bomber with a van loaded with explosives came after you guys. Fire opened from both sides of the road where you were. And it's what happened after that that led to all the trouble. What were you accused of and your men?
Well, as soon as we returned to the base 20 minutes after the incident, this situation exploded on the international media. So there was both in Afghanistan, there was protests, people shouting death to Karzai, death to Bush, death to America. It really swelled up, and then it led to us being accused of killing 19 and wounding 50 Afghan civilians, including women, children, elderly. And that allowed an investigator to come in, and the first day he was there, he interviewed some of our Marines, and then we were kicked out the next day far before the investigation was completed.
Well, I know originally there was a panel of some sort in 2008 that cleared you all, but I know that you said it really didn't clear you, and it impacted you and the men, the ability to move on, to move up in rank, and to progress through the military. What was the stain that remained on you all, even though there was that 2008 that seemed to clear you?
Yes. Yes, so in 2008, we had a 3.5-week trial in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and that was a panel that met of senior officers, and instead of any other military justice case where they, at the culmination, used legal terms such as innocent, guilty, or dismissed, they used the phrase acted appropriately, and they did it on a Friday night. They dropped that 4 months after the trial had ended on the Memorial Day weekend, so the papers just began to continuously write that we killed Afghan civilians, even and after I retired in 2014.
Well, I know that you kept fighting. The Navy Department has now put out a report just in January that said the magnitude of the investigators' error cannot be overstated. They talk about all kinds of troubles with the investigation and how it was carried out. The author of that article, also from Washington Post, he tweeted this out. He said the new report, Wiping Clean Galvin's Permanent File, makes clear that along with the Taliban's deception, U.S. Army leaders were the proximate causes for what befell the Marines. That's a stunning statement linking the actions of American commanders to those of the enemy. You fought 12 years. Your name's been cleared. Where do you go from here?
Well, it's very important what was in that 12-page report from the Pentagon. They used words accusing the investigating officer of either gross negligence or predetermined outcome. So when you have a situation like that and these types of officers are still in the military, impacting the sons and daughters of America all across the globe right now, we do have a moral hazard that needs to be taken care of. That is something that has not been cleared up. That 12-page Pentagon report is an indictment and no action has been taken. So we don't necessarily care as much about a pat on the back as these individuals that did this, that went to the press and condemned us repeatedly. These were military officers. They did it in print and on video. That type of destruction of the presumption of innocence and not allowing us to have equal justice under law, those are problems
and I know
in
that
our society.
You want to shine a light to make sure it doesn't happen to others. Fred Galvin, thank you for your service, and we are glad that you've gotten this report, and we hope good comes from it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, the last couple of days, scores of Democrats refused to comment on Virginia Governor Northam's abortion comments, saying they were unaware of what he'd said. But tonight, they wasted no time lining up to call for his resignation. 2020 presidential candidate saying he's got to go because of this very offensive photo from his past, but he says he doesn't plan to. Stick around for tonight's Power Panel. Doug Schoen is back with Doug McKinnon and Todd Starnes.
5 Democrats in the party. Does that cause problems at all?
I'm sorry, I just don't know what he said yesterday.
All right. Didn't watch our show. All right, that was yesterday. And today there's widespread condemnation as we've been reporting for this picture of the Democratic governor of Virginia. He admits that's him in the picture from his medical school yearbook. Outrage from the left over blackface and the KKK hood and robe, rightfully so, but not over comments that Northam made that many equated to infanticide. Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Fox News contributor, former Clinton pollster Doug Schoen is back. Speechwriter for President H.W. Bush and President Reagan, Doug McKinnon. And Fox Nation host Todd Starnes, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey, Shannon.
Well, listen, we looked back at what the networks have done, and the cable networks as well, over the last couple of days with respect to the infanticide comments that many characterize what Northam said as that, talking about a baby that survives. It sounded like he was talking about an attempted abortion, and then the discussion would be with resuscitating it, discussing it with the mother. Most of the networks had 0 seconds of coverage over that over the last 2 days. Now, today, this situation with the picture, which may ultimately lead to him not being the governor anymore, one way or another, has gotten a lot of coverage. Todd, why the distinction?
Well, look, Shannon, I think it's important to understand that there is significant evil in the Democrat Party right now. New York State, you've got what happened in Virginia, Rhode Island, but this Virginia governor, it really is despicable. This man advocated killing newborn babies, and it generated zero outrage from Democrats. And we really wonder, we talked about this on my radio, Shannon, where do the Democrats draw the line? Why is it okay for someone to get out there, a governor, an elected official, to get out there and say it's okay to kill an unborn child? My only guess here is maybe they would have been outraged if he was wearing a Klan uniform as they were aborting that newborn child. It's despicable.
Well, all right, Doug Schoen, I want to bring you in as a longtime Democratic pollster and give you a chance to weigh in, because there are those out there who say, listen, he says he's sticking around. He does have a few defenders out there who say this is not the man that I know for the last 30 years of public service. These pictures from the past, which he's apologized and acknowledged, they're horrible. There's no explaining them away. But certainly interesting to see the contrast in the treatment of him over the last few days in these two different separate incidents.
Well, Look, Shannon, I think, as I said earlier, this picture is indefensible. His behavior when he was a 25-year-old medical student is indefensible. And I believe his effectiveness is gone and he should resign. That being said, to my good friend Todd Starnes, I'm not evil. I'm a New York Democrat. I believe in consensus and conciliation. I'm pro-choice.
That's not what I said, Doug. That's not what I said. I said some Democrats. There is evil in the Democrat Party.
But you're not calling Doug evil.
I don't believe that.
You're not calling Doug evil.
I don't believe that there is evil. There is wrong-headedness, but I don't call people
killing newborn babies. Sweet mercy!
Todd, if I can finish, you're doing a good job yelling. But if I could finish, I'd really like to say I'm pro-choice, but I'm not pro-infanticide. It sounded to me like he was pro-infanticide. I'm against third-term abortions. I'm certainly against infanticide, and I'm happy to say that. But my larger comment, Shannon, is people of goodwill have to come together on the issues facing us. Okay. Demonizing people and political parties does not make sense. Governor Northam, I feel sympathy for him. He must go. He made a tragic mistake. He made a mistake of policy. His effectiveness is gone. But Todd, you've always been somebody who reaches out, extends the olive branch. I hope you'll do that going forward.
All right. Let me bring in Doug McKinnon, because I want to read something to this point about an interesting piece tonight in The Federalist by David Marcus, and he talks about the opportunity that's presented here. Two different ways you can look at this. He says the opportunity here is not to take Northam down, but to show progressives the folly of their ways, to teach them that their unforgiving dredging of the past for incidents of insufficient wokeness will wreak havoc on their own as well as on others. This is an opportunity to commit to the idea that forgiveness, especially for an instance of racism so long ago, must be possible. The author, to be clear, says this picture's heinous. There's no way around it. But Doug McKinnon, is there a chance here to have a conversation about people's past and how it's used against them now?
Well, Shannon, I think that's right. I'm a conservative, quote unquote, who grew up poor, who grew up with Martin Luther King Jr. as my absolute hero. And it's one of these things now where politics plays a role in all of this, unfortunately. But I do believe that that no matter what, I would predict that by tomorrow, the governor's going to resign, no matter what he says tonight, because his position is just unfortunately untenable for him. What he did as a 25-year-old medical student in the 1980s, just 30 years ago, it was as wrong then as it is wrong now. And I think with regard to his comments on abortion, it's one of these things where politics is playing a role in that. The Democrats want to run away from that subject because they know it's a losing issue for them, and more Americans are becoming horrified with what's going on in New York and as well as what's going on in Virginia on the abortion story.
Well, and there is a statement from Planned Parenthood tonight, and they're talking about there's no place for Governor Northam's racist actions or language. He must step down as governor. They talk about that the people of Virginia have to be able to trust in their governor. They took a lot of heat in the last few days, too, over his comments because they've advocated for a lot of these late-term abortion bills. They've been supporters of that, and they have invested millions of dollars in his campaign running for governor of Virginia. But Todd, tonight they say enough's enough, and they're breaking with him.
Yeah, well, the issue here for me is the governor should have resigned or should have been forced out of office as a result of those comments he made about allowing newborn babies to die. By the way, the lieutenant governor in the state, who would become governor if he steps down, feels the same way, supports that same kind of legislation. This is really appalling, Shannon. And again, this is the bigger issue here for me, is the fact that this governor made this statement about infanticide and people gave him a pass on it. And it's just unacceptable, outrageous.
All right, Doug Schoen.
Yeah, look, I think that the comments were wrong-headed. I found it a little hard to follow what he was saying, but it was clear he was advocating in some circumstances for infanticide, and that's outrageous and completely unacceptable. But he's unable to serve now, both because of outrageous comments and the unacceptable pictures.
All right, very quickly, Doug McKinnon, quick final word from you.
You know, again, I think ultimately this is healthy for politics because a lot of Americans are going to see exactly what's going on politically and that there's so much cover. And I think for the Democrats, and Todd's got a good point in terms of what's going on in New York, what's going on in Virginia. And with regard to abortion, you simply cannot be killing live babies, and that's what they were advocating. And I think ultimately this governor is going to resign tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, having covered the Kermit Gosnell trial, as I keep saying, I mean, that's why he is in jail on first-degree murder charges right now.
That's right.
All right, Doug, and Todd, thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, President Trump in favor of it. Lawmakers across the country also pushing for Bible literacy classes in public schools. But tonight, a new lawsuit out of Pennsylvania. Students say their school won't let them hand out Bibles to people who want them. School district says there's a lot more to the story. After the break, night court convenes and you are the judge. It is time for Night Court. On the docket tonight, Bibles in schools. Now, you'll remember President Trump tweeted a couple of days ago numerous states introducing Bible literacy classes, giving students the option of studying the Bible. Starting to make a turn back? Question mark. Great. Well, tonight there's a new dispute in Pennsylvania where a school district faces a federal lawsuit claiming officials improperly prevented a high school Christians in Action Club from passing out Bibles on school property during the day. Is that legal? Let's bring in tonight's Legal Eagles to debate constitutional law attorney Katie Cherkasky and criminal defense attorney, host on Law and Crime Network, Bob Bianchi. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Shannon.
All right, so this is the deal. Mechanicsburg High School, they said essentially these students want to go around and hand out Bibles. They were told they couldn't. They tried to negotiate something with the school. The school says you're not getting the full story. Here is what the superintendent of Mechanicsburg School said. This is our Exhibit B tonight. He says it's a publicity stunt. Students do have the right to distribution of non-school materials prior to the start of the school day and after the end of the school day if they develop a plan for time, place, and manner of distribution that's reviewed and approved by the administration. Bob, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, this is what we call CYA, Shannon. That's what's wrong with it, because he also said, and I quote, religious materials, including the Bible, have always and will always be welcome to bring, share, and discuss, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran, or whether it's the Torah. So you can't eat your cake and have it too. You can't have a Christian club on your campus say that those materials are welcome of all faiths, which I agree with. However, you can only distribute those materials 30 minutes before or 30 minutes after school and only on public sidewalks. Well, they can do that anyway, so the school's denying them their lawful right to be able to express their First Amendment religious freedom and freedom of expression at lunchtime. Come on, guys.
All right, Katie, let's go to Exhibit D here, because that's what the lawyers for the students are saying. They say the school district has taken away students' speech rights in school and even seeks to regulate their speech rights during non-school hours on public sidewalks that every member of the general public possesses. Your argument?
Well, that's just not the case. The school here is doing something that's common sense to avoid chaos. They have given these students the opportunity before and after school hours to distribute Bibles. They are just simply limiting this free speech activity during a limited lunch hour. And the reason for that has nothing to do with religion, but has to do with opening up the lunch area to a free speech zone. And when you do that, you're opening a can of worms. You have kids handing out Bibles today, then it's atheist propaganda the next day. You can't limit who's handing out what. And the school has every right under the Constitution to limit disruptions to the academic environment. So handing out this material during the school day could arguably very well be a disruption to that academic environment. So the school has every right to make this decision.
Okay, Bob, what about that? The school's ability to, set limits on how this is done?
Yeah, but that's not the facts of this case. No one here is suggesting that this is anything other than sanctioned by the school. It has a Christian Bible club there. These kids were there. There was no violence. There was no profanity, which are typically the areas in which the Supreme Court has limited speech and freedom of religion. They are just there. If you want it, you can do it. Now, if there was a problem, then maybe they would have a legitimate argument, but there hasn't been. So those facts have not been established. You can't say that you can distribute materials and they're welcome here, but only before and after school. That's ludicrous. It's contradictory. It's CYA. They're trying to get out of a constitutional quagmire.
All right, Katie, your closing argument.
The school is doing the absolute right thing here. They are preventing a can of worms from being opened and having the lunch hour being overtaken by useless propaganda from all sides. You have kids handing out Bibles today. The next day, it's any sort of political speech, any sort of speech whatsoever that isn't violent or discussing illegal activity. And that is all going to have to be permitted by the school if they let these students take this action during the lunch hour. And that's just going to be disruptive to the lunch environment or to the academic environment. And that is something that is protected under the Constitution for the school to avoid.
All right, we thank you both. We'll now put it to the jury at home. Let us know. Tweet me at Shannon Bream or at Fox News Night. You can use the hashtag Night Court and let us know how you would rule if you were the jury here. This apparently started back in November. It's now resulted in a lawsuit. We will follow it. Bob and Katie, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, stick around for our Midnight Hero right after this. Tweet us, by the way, at Shannon Bream or at Fox News Night. Let us know who you're cheering for. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, an awful lot happening at this hour in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, made headlines you saw this week by endorsing infanticide on camera. That wasn't a big deal to most people in the national press, but this afternoon, on the first day of Black History Month, a picture surfaced, a yearbook photograph from 1984, of Northam wearing either blackface or a KKK robe in a photograph. That's a problem for Ralph Northam. Trace Gallagher is following every development in this story for us tonight. He brings us the latest. Trace?
And Tucker, we should note for clarity, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam has now confirmed that he was in the controversial picture in his 1984 medical school yearbook showing someone dressed in a KKK robe